Welcome to the Ian Bousfield Experience. I'm glad you're here. This series of podcasts are just things that come up in my mind when I'm thinking about playing, when I'm thinking about teaching, and general thoughts about music. There are some things here that I hope you'll find really useful. And don't forget, if you've got any comments or if there's anything you want to discuss further, go to ianbousfield.com. Well, I have to confess, it's finally happened. I've stopped practicing the trombone. Does that surprise you? I didn't practice on Saturday and Sunday, the last 2 days. And there'd been a gradual decrescendo in my output of the preceding week to 10 days. And I think, like all of us, when we started this, and I hate the term lockdown, but that is what it is, when our source of gainful employment was removed from us, I thought, right, let's go through the in-tray and see all of these playing issues that I've had over the years that I can maybe in peace and quiet look at and fix. I don't know, for any of you who didn't see the horn hangout thing last Friday with a few of us trombone players on Sarah Willis's platform, there was some great things came up there. You know, Joe said, so if you ever want to try something different with your playing, now's the time. Absolutely, I've felt that as well. It's like, wow, all these things I can now look at. But I thought the most insightful comment, and the one that resonated the most with me, was when Jürgen van Rijn said, you always wish you had all of the time in the world to get some certain things fixed, and then you get the time and you don't do it. Brilliant. That's where I am. I started out with all of this enthusiasm. Christian Griego has just made a brilliant new range, completely new range of mouthpieces for me. So I was going through working on a different mouthpiece for 2 or 3 days, which I normally never get the luxury of the time to do that, to really get into, playing on a size 6 mouthpiece or something like that. And I was loving it and really enjoying it. I felt as though I just was playing the trombone for the pure joy of it. I was coming upstairs here into where I practiced, looking out at the Jura Mountains and just loving making the sound and beautiful resonance in the room that I practice in. And looking at new repertoire and, but I kind of stopped doing that as well. I wasn't so keen on doing that because what I was doing? I was just rejoicing in the joy of taking a breath and making a lovely sound on the trombone. And I do make a lovely sound on the trombone and I enjoy it. And so it's a bit sad really, but that's kind of how I have my fun. And I got into the habit. I disciplined myself very carefully, Monday to Friday, teetotal vegan, not joking. Saturday, Sunday, carnivorous alcoholic. Not quite, I exaggerate. But I knew that if I didn't get some structure into my week, I would lose my discipline completely. So I am doing that. I'm living vegan Monday to Friday and not drinking any alcohol. And then really having a weekend. It's probably the only time in our lives as musicians that we're going to get to have an inverted commas, a normal week, because you can work Monday to Friday and then relax at the weekend. And this weekend, I really did relax. Because I guess part of me was thinking, why am I doing this? We're just being told by governments that, Germany's just said there aren't going to be any concerts till the end of August. You got even more draconian announcements taking place or being threatened in London and in Spain. I have to say, I really think that I love the way Switzerland are doing it. They're making weekly announcements and they're trying to do things as it happens. So there are no sort of draconian, we're going to be in this for 2 years or 6 months or whatever. It's like we're going to reassess this situation the whole time. And I must say, I greatly appreciate that. We don't know what's around the corner. I do like Switzerland's approach, which is monitoring it almost on a daily basis and not casting too far into the future, oh, you're doomed, you're not going to be in a restaurant till Christmas, none of that sort of stuff. So I think they're taking quite a sensible approach. But nevertheless, it's been kind of like, why the heck am I bothering with this? There's nothing in the pipeline for me to play. And so I actually decided to go into the process of degeneration and sort of coming out the other side of the rebirth. Because actually letting something wind down to the point where you really need to start addressing your playing from the beginning. And it's not just your playing, it's all kinds of things in life. Where you start again, but this time with the right habits, this time doing it for the right reasons, this time making sure this is right and this is right and this is right, and being really observant that you go right back to the beginning of your basic technique and renew everything. I'm a very firm believer in it's not how much you practice, it's how often you practice. So if you practice 3 hours a day, it's not as good as practicing 30 minutes 6 times a day. Every time you return to something, you return with a fresher attitude and your brain is learning. It's just every time you come back, it learns. And I think that's where we get into the category of the advantage of taking a summer holiday, which there was always this, right, well, let's take 2 weeks off playing in the summer, and you come back and you do have the opportunity to catch the bus of improvement right at the beginning. So I've decided to do that, and I've had 2 days off playing, and I'm starting again and rebuilding from the ground up. And for anybody thinking that it's like, from the ground up means I'm just playing the odd one note followed by another note and checking the sound no, it means from the ground up for me means going right to the very, very basic, which is a free breath of air and a free release of air on everything that I do. And I'm enjoying it. And I guess this sort of degeneration and rebirth is something that we can think about doing as a profession, as looking at what's happening. It's all winding down. We are really stopping. Things are occurring to us that have never occurred to us before. I've been walking around noticing the smell of flowers and in the last few days and thinking, isn't that just so wonderful? Isn't that beautiful? And I realised that my senses have been numbed over the last 35 years because I've been so wound up in other things, business-wise, playing-wise, who knows, fighting with colleague-wise, that my senses have been numbed. And now I'm smelling things and just enjoying being out in nature. And I think it's a good time to look at the rebirth of our profession, what we can do, how we can change. Now that follows on a little bit from what I was addressing in the last podcast. And in actual fact, there were so many wonderful questions that came up or comments that came up out of the last podcast that I'm going to address some of them because they were so good. And this section I'm going to call Peter's Points. The very splendid Peter Bassano, who was for many years member of what I consider to be quite a legendary brass section in the Philharmonia Orchestra. Played with Ray Premru. He was second trombone when Ray Premru was there, when Arthur Wilson, the great Arthur Wilson, was on first trombone, and then subsequently Dudley Bright. And they had really a wonderful brass section at that time. Trumpets with John Wallace, Jock Miller, horns, Michael Thompson, Richard Watkins. Wonderful. And I first met Peter in the back, where was I? Was I riding in the back of Dudley Bright's Hillman Imp in 1978, and he was giving Peter a lift somewhere, I seem to remember. Anyway, Peter has made some brilliant comments based on the last podcast that I did. He says, I think that very few performances were like those achieved in the 70s, 80s and 90s. There are a variety of reasons. Beta blockers instead of booze, second players required to audition as if they were principals, and the removal of morning assembly and singing from schools. Discuss. right up, Peter, I'm going to discuss it. Probably not as well as you would. But it actually, on that first point, here we go. Beta blockers instead of booze. Just to give the background on that, historically, certainly in the UK, many concerts were should have been sponsored by the local brewery. In fact, they probably were. Alcohol was a very big part of musicians' working life back in those days. In fact, when I started in the Halle Orchestra, I was viewed as being, very, very suspiciously because I didn't drink beer at the morning break. And there were quite a lot of my colleagues who would have their first pint of beer in the morning break, then 2 pints at lunchtime, 1 in the afternoon break, and then maybe 1 or 2 before they went home. And that was a normal day. And then, of course, they're very proud of the fact that they didn't drink in front of their family. So there was alcohol, was the way that a lot of people coped with the stressful situations back in those days. I don't think it was just party atmosphere. It was just, as Peter points out, beta blockers instead of booze. In fact, I had wondered, there has to be these bean counters, these accountants sitting in these Swiss pharmaceutical companies, wherever, making these wonderful drugs that keep us going. And whilst they're sort of budgeting to try and find, therapy for this virus that's going around, there's probably someone going, have you noticed that we're kind of not really selling much propranolol anymore? I wonder what the connection is between this virus and us not selling much propranolol. Peter makes a great point there. The beta blocker is one of those. Actually, propranolol is a drug that people are given if they go to hospital with with panic attacks, because it calms you down very, very quickly. Now, obviously, if you've got a large proportion of orchestral players sedated, for want of a better word, it's going to be very difficult to get the excitement that you would get without that. So I think that's a really fantastic point. And like I said, I think Mark Gould did an interesting podcast, I think, which he called Pharmaceutical Concerts. Now, here's really a beauty, Peter. Second players required to audition as if they were principals. Yes, Peter, back in the day, if I remember, well, when I was a kid, first trombone players used to play on a Con 8H with a Bach 6.5 mouthpiece, Bach 42, whatever. Second trombone was on a 5G, bass trombone was on or third trombone back in those days, was on a 2G. And so, the first players played high, the second had their job. Each one had their job to do within the section. And now we get this horribly suspicious line. And it's not just on the trombone, it's on, most instruments, so-and-so orchestra, da-da-da-da-da, looking for a second player with obligation to first. Yeah, okay. Well, that's born out of he's a first trombone player that wants to get more time off. And if there's someone else in the section with it in their contract that they have to play first, second with obligation to play first, then it's easier for them to get free. Brilliant. I'm not against anyone getting free. Happen to be a first trombone player myself. I understand it. However, the era of the second trombone player. I mean, listen, one of my favourite second trombone players' highest note is a top C. You can't play higher than the top C. Doesn't matter, does it? If it goes above that, it's my job. But what a wonderful sound. Radar, left and right, making the section work. Intonation, balance, musicality, just clinging to everything that's going on. And, the specialist second trombone player, who can play a bit of first if they need to, why not? Good players can play first, second or third. Even I could have a go at playing third. I might not enjoy it. I'd probably have a bit of a laugh, but, so you should be able to play all three of the parts, yes, but you specialise in one of them. And Peter's right, that's kind of stopped happening now. I even saw an orchestra in Belgium apply for, it was a second trombone job. I think the first round was the Frank Martin Ballade and Bolero was there. And the second round had the Tomasi in it. I mean, for Peter's sake, Peter, by the time you get to the third round, anyone with a decent sound in the middle register is gone, and it's a load of freaks on with a high register, and they're there. And then you finish it with a totally dysfunctional section. And I happen to know that orchestra shortly thereafter did a tour with the organ symphony on it, and the bass trombone player had to play the solo because it was too low for the first two trombone players. You know, I mean, it's not going to help, is it? So yeah, you know, in practical terms, all this second trombone with obligation to first. The only time a second trombone player is going to play bolero is if the first trombone player falls over and breaks his or her arm 20 minutes before the concert. And then the orchestra would very gracious, you know, I hope that the second trombone player would very graciously agree to step in and do it. And if they made a mess of it, no one would really care, because how often is that going to happen? But that's the only or if they played it the octave down, no one would care. Under those circumstances, the orchestra would be just happy that someone agreed to do it. But they're the only circumstances under which a second trombone player is going to be stepping up to do that. So putting bolero in a second trombone audition is silly, frankly. Or let's put it, putting it too early in a second trombone. Or, you know, there's the equivalent things with the trumpet or the horn or the oboe, who knows what, you know. I actually would have nothing against it if you think, do the first couple of rounds, good sound, great musicality, really good intonation, great rhythmic integrity. You know, and you finish up in the last round, there's three of them. You'd be happy with any of them. Well, let's see which one of them can play the best bolero. Let's see if that helps change our mind on things. And then okay, fine, you know, that's good. So, yeah, that's, Peter, that's my opinion on that. Now, here we go. The removal of morning assembly and singing from schools. Given that the vehicle by which we perform anything on any instrument starts with the fantasy in our head and our voice, young children not singing is clearly not going to help future development. I have a 7-year-old boy who provides the soundtrack to my life. He sings all day, every bloody day, and it's wonderful. And if I'm practicing scales, he sings scales. If I'm practicing arpeggios, he sings arpeggios. If I'm practicing the Wilfred Heaton trombone concerto with all its obtuse intervals, he bloody sings that as well. And that's, the kid's a musician. There's nothing we can do about it. If I want him to be a lawyer, I have no chance. And in fact, he's actually going to compose me a piece this week, I think. And that's a huge advantage to him. And as we all know, the earlier you learn something, the better you learn it. I didn't start learning German until I was 35. My German's pretty good, but I'm always going to sound English, or sometimes occasionally Dutch, which I take as a compliment. So the earlier you start singing, it was, and Peter, I'd go on further than that. We used to sing at school, and it wasn't compulsory, but many of us then went and sung in the church choir. You know, rehearsal for the hymns on Thursday night and the choir service on Sunday morning. Put your gown and your cassock on. Nowadays, that's the kind of thing that happens in private schools and happens in minster choirs and cathedral choirs and specialist choirs. That happened in every village, where I came from. Every village had a church, and the boy, you know, your red and white cassock on with your ruff, and yes, absolutely, I think that is. So children are not learning the language of music early enough. And what Peter says there quite legitimately is, he doesn't talk about the removal of religious services from school. He talks about the removal of assembly. Now, it just so happens that at school we used to sing hymns, which is related to Christianity. You know, if we want to have a more inclusive society, perfect. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are other things we can sing. I'd like to read to you part of an email that I received from Igor Rankovic, who's bass trombone in the Belgrade Philharmonic. And it was in response to the previous podcast that I made. If you haven't listened to it, Where Were You? You should have a listen for sure. And he talks about playing the Shostakovich symphonies with Mikhail Yurovsky, who had a direct line of information to Shostakovich. He said it was like being in a time machine, fascinating stuff. And he said that kind of suffering, young Western kids, I don't think they can really understand. They can try, but some things you have to have in depth, so only some will get it. As we know, the greatest classical music was inspired by suffering. As you know, I play in the Belgrade Philharmonic since 1996. What we as an orchestra went through in the 1990s, not many will understand. We went through the breakup of the Yugoslavia, civil war, hyperinflation, and bombing of Belgrade in 1999. Decade of disasters. At some point in the 90s, our Belgrade Philharmonic monthly paycheck was 50 German marks, but we still played on. All of that left marks on us as individuals. So from our point, this corona situation, we've seen worse times. But this is the first time we stopped playing for many weeks. We played noon concerts in 1999, even during the bombing, and without electricity. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. For all of the above reasons, we as an orchestra have a tendency to play every concert like it's our last one. We are not perfect, but the energy that the Belgrade Philharmonic has, it's not every day you hear this. We really appreciate what we do, and in my humble opinion, the last 15 or 16 years of the Belgrade Philharmonic are our golden times. Of course, it's a matter of perspective, which is something you get with life experience. And it's interesting, I have also felt that. I did a concerto with a regional Hungarian orchestra last year, and I have played with Igor's orchestra. I played a concerto there 3 or 4 years ago, and the energy is something else. It's different. The sort of like the raw nature of musicality, the performance, the excitement, the communication is still there. And there's this thing in football. They always say football is a game of 11 players. It's soccer, if you want me to say, for the Americans. Is a game of 11 guys against 11 guys, or 11 goals against 11 goals. It's like 11 against 11. And sometimes it doesn't matter whether you're Real Madrid or Swindon Town. Those 11 players sometimes can have their day. I heard in Vienna, probably 10 years ago, I heard 2 concerts on consecutive evenings. The first evening, I heard the Chicago Symphony Orchestra do Shostakovich 15, conducted by Bernard Haitink. And it was this huge, polished machine. It was this epitome of elegance and discretion. And I'm not going to go as far as to say they dialed it in. No, they didn't. It was a good concert. It was very good, and they're a very, very good orchestra. The next night, I went to hear the Orchestre de Lille in northern France. Orchestre de Lille. Do Petrushka in the Music Fine. And it was the first time in the history of that orchestra they'd played in that hall. Chicago were doing it nearly every year. And I don't think I need to tell you which concert I preferred. Whichever orchestra was better was irrelevant. One orchestra was playing for their bloody lives. This is a little bit of an afterthought. I'm recording this several days after the first part of the podcast that you've just heard. And I didn't release this podcast because I was sort of so preoccupied with thoughts of my own as to where we're going, what's happening to our business, that I felt there was something else possibly that I needed to say to tie this up. And over the course of the last few days, a few things have been occurring to me. I'd like to give you some quotes from the great Pierre Boulez, one of the conductors who I really most enjoyed working with. And here are a few of his quotes. And Pierre always insisted that a quote was relevant to a time. So 1967, blow the opera houses up. I'm not going to go into any more detail about these. They're huge subjects, all in themselves. 1971, all the art of the past must be destroyed. And 1967, the Paris Opera is full of dust and crap. Operatic tourists make me want to vomit. On minimalist music, 1987. This is supermarket music. So you can see he was not averse to saying controversial things. He also said something rather sarcastic about the 12-tone, the Schoenbergs, etc., saying that, congratulations, they can count to 12, and, they haven't got beyond understanding that music is actually more than just multiples of 12. And he was a big reactionary, and of course he conducted a lot of Schoenberg, but I can't help wondering how Pierre would feel about the apparent dissembling of our business and profession. We have our great European leaders saying that this is going to go on for 2 years. Well, and who knows, it may do. And I'm not going to go into the political whys and wherefores, nor am I going to start to speculate or become a virus expert. Not like all of the ones that I see on Facebook. But I do wonder what Pierre would feel about this, about how we rebuild from the ashes that have been created at the moment. I mentioned in the previous podcast that I think we're playing an extremely dangerous game in giving too many things away. Imagine lawyers saying, in response to the undoubted crisis that we're all suffering, we'd like to give all of our services free of charge. Can't see it, can you? Yet we want to be treated as professionals, so we need to be careful. And in actual fact, I've even had some of my colleagues comment on me that I shouldn't be giving this away free of charge. This, by the way, is not something that I would consider my acumen that needs to be purchased. There are other things that I personally, from a professional level, wouldn't do free of charge. But you're all welcome to this, if you can put up with it. Now, here's the main point of what's been sort of going around my head over the last few days. I realised I was going for a walk by the Aare River here, just at the bottom of the hill where I live, and with my wife. And I said, I realised that I am my product. I am my business. I am walking around as a product. They might defund orchestras, they might stop concerts, but they're not going to ban music, are they? And we've survived to this point, and we'll survive from this point on. We're going to be fine. But it might defrock a few situations where if you have a product, you're going to be okay. So we'd better make sure that we do. If any of my students are listening, work on your product. Guys and girls, it's all about making you the best you can possibly be. Now, this is probably a product all in itself. I mean podcast. But what does becoming your own product entail? Well, it, in my opinion, relies on you being what the Germans would say, selbstständig, that you're kind of independent as a musician, and you don't need the security of an orchestral job. You don't need the security of a teaching job. Nice that it is, and it's sad that we have to talk like this, but you as a musician have a product that people want to listen to, and you as a musician have something to say for yourself and can communicate that both musically when we play and when we speak and when we interact. And that, I think, is something that we all need to focus on. It's certainly making me focus. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. If there are any issues that you found particularly interesting, don't forget to contact me, and always go to ianbousfield.com for lots more interesting stuff.